I'm Susan, 18 female. I live in a small dorm room now, surrounded by textbooks and the faint smell of instant coffee, a stark contrast to the home I grew up in. I'm a first-year law student, trying to build a future my mother would have been proud of. But that future was almost derailed by an act of profound disrespect from the one person who was supposed to help protect her memory, my stepfather. This is the story of how he tried to erase my past, and how I used the law, my mother's foresight, and his own arrogance to make him pay for every single memory he threw away. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The day I left for college was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. There was the electric thrill of a new beginning, the nervous flutter of independence, and the deep, aching sadness of leaving the home that my mother had so carefully and lovingly built. She had passed away 2 years prior, after a long and draining battle with cancer. Her absence was a constant, hollow space in the house, a silence that my stepfather, Richard, seemed all too eager to fill with his own noise. My room was more than just a room. It was a sanctuary, a museum of my childhood and a shrine to my mother's love. Every object held a story. On my bookshelf sat the complete collection of Nancy Drew mysteries she had bought for me, one by one, for every birthday from age 8 to 14. The spines were cracked, the pages soft with use. In my closet was a heavy wooden chest, hand-carved by my grandfather, which Mom had used to store all of her own childhood treasures before passing it down to me. Inside were her faded ballet slippers, a bundle of letters from my father who died when I was a baby, and her favorite cashmere scarf, which still faintly smelled of her perfume. The walls were adorned with framed photos, me and Mom at the beach, building a lopsided sandcastle, the two of us covered in flour, baking cookies in the kitchen, her proud, beaming face at my middle school graduation. Richard had never understood the significance of these things. To him, they were just clutter. He had married my mother when I was 12, 5 years before she got sick. He was a real estate agent, a man who saw everything in terms of market value and square footage. He was polished, charming on the surface, but underneath there was a coldness, an impatience for anything that didn't directly benefit him. He tolerated my mother's sentimentality, but I always felt he viewed it as a weakness. After she was gone, his tolerance evaporated. He started making small comments, suggestions that it was time to modernize the house, to clear out the old stuff and move on. I resisted, fiercely protective of the last tangible pieces of my mom. The house was hers, and every corner of it echoed with her presence. My room, especially, was off-limits. Before she passed, she made me promise I would keep it just as it was, at least until I was ready to sort through things myself. "Everything in here, Susie," she'd said, her voice weak but firm, "is a part of our story. It's yours." The drive to the university was tense. Richard was unusually cheerful, talking animatedly about his plans for the house now that he'd have it all to himself. "Finally, some room to breathe," he declared, slapping the steering wheel. "Gonna get this place looking like a real bachelor pad." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but I tried to dismiss it as pre-college jitters. I was an adult now, heading off to study law. I couldn't let his careless words get to me. He was just being Richard. Insensitive, but probably harmless. When we arrived, he helped me move my boxes into the dorm with a performative enthusiasm that grated on my nerves. He kept checking his watch, clearly eager to leave. "All right, kiddo," he said, giving me a quick, awkward hug. "Don't get into too much trouble. Call me if you need money." And just like that, he was gone, his expensive sedan peeling out of the parking lot. I stood there, amidst the chaos of moving day, feeling a profound sense of loneliness. I was officially on my own. That first week was a blur of orientation events, meeting new people, and figuring out the campus map. I was so busy trying to navigate my new life that I barely had time to think about home. I texted my aunt, my mother's older sister Alina, a few times, letting her know I was settling in okay. She was my rock, the one person who truly understood my grief. She was an antique appraiser, a woman who, like my mother, saw the soul in old objects. She had always despised Richard, calling him a hollow man with a shiny suit. She had warned me to be careful, to not trust him with Mom's legacy. I tried to call the house a couple of times, but Richard didn't answer. I figured he was busy with work. It was on a Friday night, at the end of my first full week of classes, that the message came through. I was in the common room with a few new friends, trying to seem normal and carefree, when my phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Richard. My heart sank before I even opened it. The image was of my bedroom, or what used to be my bedroom. The walls, once a soft lavender my mom and I had painted together, were now a harsh, sterile gray. My bed, my desk, my bookshelf, all gone. In their place was a monstrous black leather reclining sofa, a massive flat-screen TV mounted on the wall where my photos used to hang, and a mini fridge humming in the corner. The cherry on top was a garish neon sign that read Rick's Man Cave. Every trace of me, of my mother, had been systematically erased and replaced with a monument to his own ego. Beneath the photo was a short message. Finally got around to that renovation project. Looks great, huh? Plenty of room for the guys on poker night now. LOL. I stared at the screen, the laughter from the students around me fading into a dull roar in my ears. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the room. It was the chest from my grandfather, the books from my mother, the framed memories. He hadn't just redecorated, he had desecrated a sacred space. He had taken my entire childhood, my entire inheritance of memories, and thrown it away like garbage. The LOL at the end was the final twist of the knife. He wasn't just careless, he was cruel. He was laughing at my pain. In that moment, the grief and sadness that had been simmering inside me for 2 years ignited into pure, cold rage. He thought he had the last laugh. He didn't know who he was dealing with. He didn't know that my mother, even from beyond the grave, had already given me the perfect weapon for my revenge. The air in the crowded common room suddenly felt thin and suffocating. The cheerful chatter of my new classmates became an unbearable noise, each laugh and exclamation a sharp jab against my raw nerves. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, even though no one was looking. I scrambled to my feet, mumbling a hasty excuse about needing to study, and practically ran back to the sterile quiet of my dorm room. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, my body trembling. I opened the message again, my thumbs shaking as I zoomed in on the picture. Every detail was a fresh wave of agony. The soft, worn rug my mother had bought for me was gone, replaced by a cold, laminate floor. The window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading, curled up with a book and a blanket, was now occupied by a chrome bar cart stocked with liquor bottles. He hadn't just removed my things, he had annihilated the very essence of the room. It was an act of erasure. The casual, mocking tone of his text replayed in my head. Looks great, huh? LOL. He wasn't just renovating, he was gloating. This was a power play, a deliberate and calculated act to assert his dominance over the house, over my mother's memory, and over me. He had waited until I was gone, hundreds of miles away and helpless, to strike. He had sent the picture as a trophy, a digital dagger to let me know that he had won, that his world had completely supplanted hers. My first instinct was to call him and scream, to let loose the torrent of fury and pain that was choking me. I dialed his number, my fingers clumsy with rage. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. His voice, slick and professional, filled my ear. You've reached Richard. I'm probably closing a deal or on the golf course. Leave a message. The casual arrogance of it made my blood boil. Closing a deal. While he had just destroyed the only deal that ever mattered to me, the unspoken contract of respect for the dead. I hung up without leaving a message. What could I even say? He wouldn't understand. He wouldn't care. To him, I was just an emotional girl, overreacting to some old junk being thrown out. My next call was to Aunt Alina. She answered on the first ring, her calm, warm voice a soothing balm. Susan, is everything all right, dear? You sound upset. The dam broke. Sobs racked my body as I tried to force the words out, explaining what Richard had done, describing the picture, the text message. I could hear her sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. There was a moment of silence, and I knew she was processing, her mind, always sharp and analytical, working through the implications. That vile, soulless man, she said finally, her voice laced with a cold fury that mirrored my own. I knew he was a snake, but this is a new level of despicable. He threw everything away, Alina, I cried, the reality of it hitting me with full force. Grandpa's chest, Mom's letters, all the photos, it's all gone. He laughed about it. Okay, Susan, listen to me, she said, her tone shifting from anger to strategic calm. I need you to breathe. Crying won't solve this. We need to think, are you absolutely certain he threw everything away? Could it be in the attic, the garage? Look at the picture, I said, my voice thick with despair. There's a mini fridge where the chest used to be. He sent it to me to be cruel. He wanted me to know it was all gone. He probably hired one of those junk removal services and had it all hauled to the dump the second I was out the door. Another silence. Then, he sent you a photo and a text message. Susan, I need you to save that. Do not delete it. Take a screenshot. Email it to yourself and to me right now. That is evidence. That is his admission, his boast. Her words cut through my haze of grief. Evidence. The word resonated with the part of my brain that was now a law student. This wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was an action, and actions have consequences. Okay, I said, my voice steadier. I'm sending it now. As I forwarded the message, a memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharpening into focus. It was from a few weeks after Mom's funeral. We were in the office of her estate lawyer, Mr. Davies, a kind, elderly man who had known my mother her whole life. He was going over the will with me and Richard. Most of it was standard. The house went to Richard, with the provision that I could live there until I finished my education. Her savings and investments were put into a trust for my college tuition. It all seemed straightforward. But there was something else, a specific clause Mr. Davies had read aloud. At the time, I was so numb with grief that the words had barely registered. And to my beloved daughter, Susan, he had read, his voice gentle. I bequeath the entire contents of her childhood bedroom, including all furniture, personal effects, heirlooms, and memorabilia contained therein, to be hers absolutely and without condition. Richard had scoffed, a quiet, dismissive sound. It's just a bunch of teenage stuff, David, he'd said to the lawyer. Knickknacks and posters. Mr. Davies had looked at him over the top of his spectacles. Be that as it may, Richard, the will is legally binding. The contents of that room are Susan's legal property. The memory hit me like a lightning bolt. It wasn't just my sentimental property, it was my legal property. Richard hadn't just thrown out clutter. He had willfully destroyed my inheritance. The photograph wasn't just a taunt, it was a confession. He had sent me photographic proof of his destruction of my legally bequeathed assets. The LOL was not just an insult, it was an admission of his callous disregard for a legally binding document he had sat and listened to himself. Alina, I said, my voice dropping, the tears replaced by an icy resolve. I think he broke the law. The conversation with Annalena became the pivot point where my grief began to calcify into a plan. We stayed on the phone for another hour, her practical, methodical mind helping me organize my chaotic thoughts. She made me recount every detail I could remember from the meeting with Mr. Davies. The more we talked, the more the memory of that day solidified. I could almost feel the stiff leather of the chair in the lawyer's office, smell the faint scent of old paper and lemon polish. I remembered Richard's demeanor, bored, impatient, as if the reading of the will was a tedious formality standing between him and his new, unencumbered life as the sole owner of my mother's house. When Mr. Davies read the clause about my room, Richard had waved a dismissive hand. Of course, her stuff is her stuff, he'd said, clearly not absorbing the legal weight of the words. To him, contents meant a few posters and old clothes. He couldn't conceive that a dusty wooden chest or a box of old letters could have any real, quantifiable value. That was his weakness. He only understood value in terms of dollars and cents, sale prices and commissions. He was about to get an education in a different kind of value, one that could, ironically, be translated directly into the language he respected most: money. The first thing you need to do on Monday morning is call Mr. Davies, Alina instructed, her voice firm. Don't email, call, tell him exactly what happened. He will have the original copy of the will. He was the executor. This is precisely the kind of thing he needs to know about. What if Richard just denies it? I asked, a flicker of doubt creeping in. What if he says he just put it all in storage? He sent you a photograph, Susan, she reminded me. He bragged about it. That was his mistake. That man's ego will be his undoing. He wanted to hurt you, and he was so proud of himself that he created a permanent record of his crime. After we hung up, I couldn't sleep. I spent the rest of the weekend in a state of feverish activity. I scoured my laptop and old cloud accounts, searching for any photos I had of my room. I found dozens. Pictures from birthdays, photos of me doing homework at my desk, selfies with F. Reens where the contents of my room were clearly visible in the background. I began to compile a folder, meticulously documenting every significant item I could see. The antique four-poster bed that had been my grandmother S. The Victorian-era vanity table and mirror my mom had found at a flea market and lovingly restored for my 16th birthday. The collection of hand-painted porcelain dolls that had been passed down through 3 generations of women in my family. With each photo I found, my resolve hardened. These weren't just things, they were a legacy. My mother had known Richard's character. She must have. That clause in the will wasn't just a sentimental gesture, it was a shield. It was her final act of protecting me, of ensuring that a part of her, a part of our shared history, would remain mine no matter what. She was a meticulous planner, a woman who always thought 5 steps ahead. It was a trait I'd inherited, one that was now being honed by my legal studies. She had left me her final words in the form of a legal document, and I was going to make sure they were honored. On Monday morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, I stepped out of my English literature lecture and found a quiet corner in the library. My heart was pounding as I dialed Mr. Davies' office number. His secretary put me through immediately. "Susan, my dear, it's good to hear from you," he said, his voice as kind and steady as I remembered. "How are you finding university life?" "It's going well, Mr. Davies, thank you," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But I'm afraid I have to call you about a serious matter regarding my mother's will." I explained the situation in a clear, concise manner, just as Aunt Alina and I had rehearsed. I told him about leaving for college, about Richard's message, and the photograph of the man cave. I described how the room had been completely stripped of its contents. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mr. Davies finally spoke, the warmth in his voice had been replaced by a steely tone. "He did what?" "He threw everything away," I repeated, "and he sent me a picture of it. And I assume he did this without your permission." I had no idea he was planning to do anything. I was devastated. "Susan," he said slowly, the legal mind clearly turning, "the clause regarding the contents of your room was explicit. Those items were legally bequeathed to you. They were your property as of the moment of your mother's passing. Richard was, in essence, a custodian of that property while you were a minor living in the house. By disposing of it without your consent, he has engaged in what is known as conversion of property, or, to put it more simply, theft. And since he was in a position of trust, it's a significant breach. The legal terms, conversion of property, breach of trust, were like music to my ears. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was a legitimate legal case. The photograph he sent you," Mr. Davies continued, "is extraordinarily damning. It demonstrates clear intent. Can you send it to me, along with any other photographs you have of the room as it was?" "I've already compiled a folder. I can send it right away." "Excellent, you've done well, Susan. Your mother would be proud of your clear-headedness in this." His words made my eyes well up, but this time, the tears were not of sorrow, but of strength. "Here is what we are going to do," he said, outlining the first steps of a plan. "We are going to treat this with the seriousness it deserves. Richard has mistaken sentiment for weakness. We are about to teach him a very expensive lesson about the law." Hanging up the phone, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I was no longer just a grieving daughter. I was a client. I was a plaintiff. Richard thought he was dealing with an 18-year-old girl he could easily intimidate and dismiss. He had no idea he was about to face the full weight of his late wife's final words, wielded by a daughter who was now learning the very language of the law he had so carelessly broken. The days that followed my call with Mr. Davies were a strange mix of mundane college life and the clandestine work of building a legal case. By day, I was a typical freshman, navigating lectures on torts and contract law, eating pizza in the dining hall, and making small talk with my roommate. But by night, my dorm room transformed into a war room. My laptop was my command center, and my allies were an old-school lawyer and an antique appraiser. Mr. Davies was methodical and thorough. He first requested a formal copy of the probate court records, ensuring we had a certified version of the will. "The foundation of any good case is unimpeachable paperwork," he explained over the phone. "We leave no room for procedural arguments." He also had me write a detailed, chronological statement of events from my last conversation with Richard before leaving for college to the moment I received photograph. "Include dates, times, and exact quotes as best you can remember them," he instructed. "Details matter." My law textbooks suddenly became more than just assigned reading. They were my arsenal. I read cases on property conversion and breach of fiduciary duty with a new, ravenous intensity. I was learning the theory in class and seeing its real-world application in my own life. It was empowering. The law was no longer an abstract concept. It was a tool, a weapon, and I was learning how to wield it. Meanwhile, Anna Lehner began the monumental task of trying to assign a value to the items that had been destroyed. This was the crux of our case. To sue for damages, we needed a number. Richard's great mistake was assuming the contents of my room were worthless junk. Lehner, with her expert eye and extensive knowledge, knew otherwise. We worked together over a series of long video calls. I would share my screen, showing her the folder of photos I had compiled. "Okay, let's start with the big items," she'd say, her face serious and focused on her own monitor. "The bed. That was your great-grandmother's, wasn't it? Looks like American black walnut post-Civil War era. The carving on the headboard is distinctive. I'll need to research the maker, but based on auction records for similar pieces, we're likely looking at a replacement value of between $8,000 and $10,000. I nearly dropped my phone. $10,000 for a bed I had slept in my whole life without a second thought. We moved on, the vanity table my mom had restored. "That's a beautiful piece," Lehner murmured, zooming in on a photo. "Art Nouveau, circa 1910, the silvering on the mirror looks original. The restoration your mother did was impeccable. That adds to its value. I'd estimate its value conservatively at $4,000. One by one, we went through the room. The hand-carved chest from my grandfather. "That's a unique folk art piece. Priceless to you, of course, but for insurance and legal purposes, we need a number. Given the craftsmanship and the type of wood, I'd appraise it at $5,000. The collection of porcelain dolls, another $6,000. The first edition Nancy Drew books, which my mother had painstakingly collected, $2,000. Even the worn Oriental rug, which I'd thought was just an old carpet, turned out to be a handmade Persian piece worth several $1,000s. The list grew, and the numbers climbed to a staggering total. These weren't just sentimental objects, they were valuable antiques and collectibles. My mother had been a woman of quiet, excellent taste. She had filled her home, and my room, with beautiful things that had history and worth. Richard, in his ignorant haste to create his tacky man cave, had thrown away a small fortune. The hardest part was valuing the things that were purely sentimental. My mother's letters, my baby photos, her cashmere scarf. For items of no market value but immense personal significance, the law sometimes allows for damages based on sentimental value. Though it's difficult to quantify, Mr. Davies explained. We will list them, describe their importance, and argue that their loss caused severe emotional distress. Lehner found a specialist, a certified appraiser of historical documents, to provide a statement on what private letters from a specific era could be worth to collectors, to give us some basis, however tenuous. Every item on our list was being backed up by professional opinion and market data. We were building a fortress of facts and figures, leaving no crack for Richard to slip through. About 2 weeks into the process, Mr. Davies called me with an update. "I have sent an initial letter of inquiry to Richard," he said. "It's a very neutral letter, simply stating that I am an attorney representing you in the matter of your mother's estate and that we have some questions regarding personal property bequeathed to you in the will. I have not made any accusations yet. We are merely putting him on notice. How he responds will tell us a lot." Richard responded 3 days later, not to Mr. Davies, but to me. He called my cell, his voice oozing with false concern. "Hey, Susan, I got a weird letter from that old lawyer Davies. What's all this about? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, remembering Mr. Davies' instructions. Be polite, be brief, and admit nothing. Refer him to me. "Hi, Richard," I said, my voice as level as I could make it. "I think it's best if you just speak with Mr. Davies about it. He's handling my mother's estate." "Handling it? It's been handled for 2 years," he scoffed. "Is this about that old junk from your room? I did you a favor cleaning all that out. You've got a fresh start now at college. You don't need all that stuff cluttering up your life." "As I said," I repeated, my grip tightening on the phone, "you should direct any questions to my lawyer." "Your lawyer," he laughed, a harsh, condescending S. "Ound, don't be so dramatic, Susan. You're a college kid, not the star of a courtroom drama. Just tell your lawyer to send me a bill for his pointless letter, and we can forget this nonsense." He hung up. The call was exactly what Mr. Davies had predicted. Richard was arrogant, dismissive, and completely underestimated me. He still thought this was a little tantrum, a silly dispute over junk. He had no concept of the storm that was about to break over his head. I immediately called Mr. Davies and recounted the conversation, word for word. "Perfect," the lawyer said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "He has confirmed his actions and demonstrated his complete lack of remorse. He's making our job very easy. It's time for the next step. It's time to send the demand." The next phase of our plan was the creation of the official demand letter. This, Mr. Davies explained, was the legal equivalent of a formal shot across the bow. It would be our one and only attempt to settle the matter before filing a lawsuit. The letter needed to be precise, irrefutable, and intimidating. It needed to lay out our case so clearly and overwhelmingly that Richard's own lawyer would advise him to surrender. The centerpiece of the demand letter was the valuation report. Aunt Alina worked tirelessly, consulting with her network of specialists to create a comprehensive, multi-page document that was less a simple list and more a museum catalog. Each item was professionally described, its history and provenance noted where possible, and its fair market replacement value cited, backed up with references to recent auction sales or listings from reputable dealers. The final report was a masterpiece of detail and a testament to Alina's expertise. The grand total was shocking, even to me. When all the antiques, collectibles, jewelry, and other valuables were tallied, the number came to $87,450. $87,000. I whispered into the phone, staring at the final figure on the PDF Alina had sent me. "Is that even possible?" "It's not only possible, it's a conservative estimate," Alina replied. "I used the lower end of the valuation range for several items to ensure it would hold up to scrutiny. That man didn't just clear out a teenager's bedroom, Susan. He threw away a curated collection of heirlooms and antiques your mother spent years acquiring. He just didn't have the eyes to see it." To this subtotal, Mr. Davies added a section for the items of purely sentimental value. He drafted a powerful paragraph arguing that the intentional and malicious destruction of these irreplaceable items, the letters, the photographs, the personal mementos, had caused me severe and ongoing emotional distress. He attached a figure of $25,000 for this, citing legal precedents where courts had awarded significant damages for the loss of property with high sentimental worth. Finally, he added a preliminary estimate for legal fees and the cost of the appraisals. The grand total in the demand letter was a staggering $115,000. The number needs to be high enough to get his absolute, undivided attention, Mr. Davies explained. It needs to frighten him. It needs to make him realize this is not some small claims court issue that he can ignore. The package was assembled. It included a cover letter from Mr. Davies, formally accusing Richard of the tort of conversion and breach of his custodial duty. It referenced the specific clause in my mother's will. It included the complete, itemized appraisal report. And as the final, devastating piece of evidence, it included a high-quality printout of the photograph Richard had sent me from his phone, with his mocking text message printed neatly below it. Exhibit A. We will send it via certified mail with a signature required, Mr. Davies said. He will have 30 days to respond with an offer of settlement. If he fails to respond, or if his response is unsatisfactory, we will file a civil suit immediately. The letter was sent on a Tuesday. I tracked the package online like a hawk. I saw it was delivered and signed for on Thursday afternoon. Then, silence. For a week, I heard nothing. The quiet was unnerving. I started to doubt myself. What if he just ignored it? What if he had his own high-powered lawyer who would tear our case apart? The call came the following Friday evening. It was not Richard. It was a man who introduced himself as Marcus Thorne, Richard's attorney. His voice was smooth, professional, and carried an undertone of weary resignation. He wasn't aggressive or dismissive. He sounded like a man who had just been handed a losing case and was already calculating the cost of cutting his client's losses. He didn't call me. He called Mr. Davies, who then called me immediately after to debrief. His lawyer was very reasonable, Mr. Davies said, a hint of amusement in his voice. He didn't dispute the facts. I believe the phrase he used after I walked him through the evidence was, "My client appears to have acted with profound foolishness." According to Mr. Davies, the lawyer, Thorne, had admitted that Richard was in a very difficult legal position. The will was clear. The destruction of property was admitted. The photograph was, in his words, a catastrophic, self-inflicted wound. However, he attempted to negotiate. He claims his client had no idea the items were valuable, Mr. Davies recounted. He's trying to argue that the damages should be far lower, that Richard shouldn't be held accountable for a value he couldn't possibly have known. That's not a defense, Mr. Davies had countered. Ignorance of value does not grant you the right to destroy someone else's property. The onus was on him to have the items appraised or to place them in storage for Susan if he wanted them out of the house. He chose the most destructive and insulting path possible. Thorne's initial offer was a paltry $20,000. A nuisance value offer, Mr. Davies called it. It's a standard tactic. They're testing our resolve. I felt a surge of indignation. $20,000, that's an insult. Exactly, Mr. Davies agreed. Which is why I rejected it on the spot. I told Mr. Thorne that our number of $115,000 was not an opening bid for a negotiation. It was the price of avoiding a public lawsuit that would not only cost his client that much or more in a judgment, but would also do irreparable harm to his professional reputation as a real estate agent. I may have mentioned how poorly, defrauded his stepdaughter of her inheritance, would look on a Zillow review. There was a pause. He's going to go back to Richard and explain the grim reality of his situation, Mr. Davies concluded. I expect to hear from him again soon with a much more serious offer. Stay strong, Susan, we have him. The waiting was agonizing, but it was a different kind of waiting now. It was the tense, thrilling anticipation of a checkmate in a game of chess. Richard had made his move with brazen, unthinking aggression. We had responded with a quiet, calculated strategy. Now, his king was in check, and he was running out of squares to move. The second offer came 4 days later. Marcus Thorne called Mr. Davies again, his tone even more conciliatory. The new offer was $75,000. It was a significant jump, an admission that they knew they were in serious trouble. He's trying to meet us in the middle, Mr. Davies told me over the phone. Thorne is pleading his client's case. He says Richard is willing to liquidate some investments, but that our full demand would cause him significant financial hardship. He also mentioned that Richard is extremely remorseful. I laughed a short, bitter sound. Remorseful? He's not remorseful, he's terrified. He got caught. Precisely, Mr. Davies said. But the offer is now substantial. It's enough that I am legally obligated to present it to you and ask for your decision. We can accept it, and this is all over, or we can hold firm and proceed to court. I thought for a moment. $75,000 was a lot of money. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. It would guarantee my financial security through law school and beyond. It was a victory, but it wasn't justice. It wasn't the number we had so carefully and painstakingly calculated. It was a discount on his disrespect. It was letting him off the hook for 35% of his transgression. No, I said, my voice clear and firm. We calculated the value, we know what he took. That's the price. $115,000, not a penny less. There was a small smile in Mr. Davies' voice. I was hoping you'd say that. Your mother was never one to back down from a fight she knew she was right about. You're very much her daughter. Mr. Davies conveyed our rejection of the offer and our final, non-negotiable demand. He gave them a deadline, 5:00 p.m. on Friday. If we did not have a signed settlement agreement by then, a lawsuit would be filed on Monday morning. The next few days were the longest of my life. I went to classes, I studied, I tried to focus, but my mind was elsewhere. I was constantly checking my phone, waiting for the call that would decide everything. What if he called our bluff? What if he decided to take his chances in court? The thought was terrifying, but I held my ground. This was about more than the money. It was about the principle. It was about the LOL at the end of his text message. It was about the smirk I could imagine on his face when he sent it. He needed to understand, in the only language he understood, the true cost of what he had done. Friday came, the hours ticked by. Noon, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. I sat in the library, staring at a textbook on civil procedure, but the words were just a blur. At 4:45 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mr. Davies. "They've agreed," he said simply. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I leaned my head against the all wood of the library bookshelf and closed my eyes. Thorne sent over the signed settlement agreement via email, Mr. Davies continued. They've accepted the full amount. The funds will be transferred to my firm's trust account within 10 business days. Richard will also be responsible for all of our legal fees, as stipulated. But there was one more thing, a condition. Richard is insisting on a meeting, Mr. Davies said, his tone cautious. Just you, him, and the lawyers. He wants to apologize in person. His lawyer is framing it as a necessary step for his client's closure. My immediate reaction was revulsion. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to hear his fake, lawyer-coached apology. Do I have to? No, you don't. We can refuse. But, Mr. Davies paused. Sometimes, seeing the consequences of their actions reflected in the other person's face is the most potent part of the victory. It's your choice entirely, Susan. I thought about it. Hiding behind my lawyer felt safe, but it also felt incomplete. Richard had sent me a picture to gloat, to show me his power from a distance. He had laughed from afar. I realized I didn't want this to end with a quiet bank transfer. I wanted to see him. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to look me in the eye when he admitted what he had done. Okay, I said, I'll do it, but it has to be on my terms. It will be at your office, and I'll be flying in for it. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday. I used my own savings to book a flight home. Walking into Mr. Davies' familiar, wood-paneled office felt surreal. I was no longer the grieving teenager who had sat here 2 years ago. I was a woman who had fought for her own justice. Richard was already there, sitting beside his lawyer. He looked terrible. He was pale, his expensive suit seemed to hang off him, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He had lost his slick, confident sheen. When he saw me, he flinched, a barely perceptible motion, and he couldn't meet my eyes. We sat down opposite them at the large conference table. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat and began with some legal platitudes about finding an amicable resolution. Then, he gestured to his client. Richard would like to say a few words. Richard looked up, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled not with remorse but with a bitter resentment. He was a man who had been outplayed and he hated it. He began to speak, the words sounding rehearsed and hollow. "Susan," he began, his voice strained, I want to apologize. What I did was thoughtless. I didn't understand how much that stuff meant to you. I was just trying to make a change in the house, to move forward. I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you." I listened, my expression unmoving. It was the most insincere apology I had ever heard. He wasn't sorry for what he did, he was sorry he got caught. He was sorry it was costing him a fortune. When he finished, there was an expectant silence. They were waiting for me to say, "I accept your apology." They were waiting for me to make him feel better. I let the silence stretch, watching the discomfort grow on his face. Finally, I spoke, my voice quiet but carrying across the table. "You weren't thoughtless, Richard. You were cruel. You waited until I was gone, and you sent me a picture to laugh about it. You didn't just throw away my stuff. You threw away my mother's legacy. You desecrated her memory for a place to play poker. This was never about the things. It was about your disrespect. And disrespect has a price. Today, you're paying it." I looked him directly in the eye. "I don't accept your apology because you aren't sorry, but I do accept your money, every single cent of it." I saw a flicker of the old, arrogant anger flash in his eyes before his lawyer subtly placed a hand on his arm. Richard said nothing. He just stared at me, defeated. I stood up. "Mr. Davies, I believe we're finished here." I walked out of that office without a backward glance. I hadn't screamed or cried. I had delivered my own verdict, cold and clear. The consequences had been unveiled, and he had been forced to look at them. The money was just the punctuation mark on a sentence that had begun with a taunting photograph and ended with his total humiliation. The money arrived in my trust account the following week. Seeing that number on my bank statement was a surreal moment. It was a sum so large it felt like a typo. It wasn't lottery winnings or a lucky break. It was restitution. It was the quantified value of memory, love, and a mother's foresight. It was the price of disrespect, paid in full. The first thing I did was call Aunt Alina. "It's done," I told her, and I could hear the smile in her voice as she congratulated me. I insisted on sending her a significant portion of the settlement to compensate her for her time, her expertise, and the expenses she'd incurred helping with the appraisals. She protested tea first, but I was firm. This was our victory, not just mine, I told her. We did this together. My relationship with Richard was, of course, completely severed. As part of the settlement, I relinquished any claim to live in my mother's house. It was a condition he had insisted on, and I had gladly agreed. The house, as it was now, was no longer my home. It was just a building haunted by his presence. He had gotten his wish. He had the house all to himself. But he had paid a hefty price for it, both financially and, I hoped, in the quiet moments when he had to live with the knowledge of what he had done. I heard through Aunt Alina that he had to sell a rental property he owned and cash in a large portion of his stock portfolio to cover the settlement. The man cave had become the most expensive room in his life. The bulk of the settlement money went into secure, long-term investments, managed by a financial advisor Mr. Davies recommended. It was my future, a safety net built from the ashes of my past. It ensured I would graduate from law school debt-free, with enough capital to start my own life, maybe even my own practice one day, on my own terms. It was the greatest gift my mother could have given me, a final act of provision that went far beyond what she had ever intended. But I knew the money wasn't the real inheritance. The real inheritance was the strength I had discovered in myself. It was the lesson that the law could be a shield for the vulnerable and a sword against the arrogant. It was the bond forged with my aunt in our shared mission. I didn't try to replace the items I had lost. They were irreplaceable. No amount of money could bring back my grandfather's hand-carved chest or my mother's handwritten letters. Instead, I decided to honor their memory in a new way. After my first year of law school, I used a small portion of the funds to put a down payment on a small condo a few blocks from campus. It was my own space, a place that Richard had no connection to, a place where I could build a new sanctuary. It was modest, with high ceilings and a big window that let in the morning light. Aunt Alina came to visit and help me decorate. We didn't buy expensive antiques. Instead, we went to flea markets and small, independent art fairs, just like my mother used to do. We found a beautiful, old wooden writing desk, not as grand as my old one, but sturdy and full of character. We bought a comfortable armchair for the corner, perfect for reading. Alina gave me a housewarming gift, a large, elegant frame. Inside, she had carefully arranged and mounted a few of the best photographs of my mother that we had managed to save from old digital files and albums she had at her house. My mom, smiling on her wedding day. My mom holding me as a baby. The two of us on our last vacation together. I placed that frame on the wall above my new desk. It was the first thing I hung up. This new room wasn't a replica of my old one. It couldn't be. The past was the past. But it was a space filled with a similar spirit, a spirit of love, resilience, and quiet strength. It was a room I had earned, a room I had fought for. It was a room of my own, built from the foundations of my mother's love and my own newfound power. Every now and then, I think about Richard, alone in that big house in his ridiculously expensive man cave. I don't feel anger anymore, just a kind of distant pity. He had tried to erase my history, but in the end, he only succeeded in erasing himself from my future. He is a ghost in a house that is no longer a home, while I am here in my own space, surrounded by light, with my mother's smiling face watching over me, ready to take on whatever comes next.